How are humans supposed to live? How are humans supposed to live? It's getting off to a bad start, isn't it? Anyway, okay. How are humans supposed to live? If you clicked on this video, it's probably because you have a sneaking suspicion that the answer is not like this. This question has been in my brain since I was 10 years old. I remember when it was planted there. I saw in my 5th grade science book an illustration of an Ice Age family at work constructing their mammoth bone shelter, and I thought, oh, that's how we're supposed to live. I hadn't thought to ask the question before. This image resonated on a deep level with me. Over the following days and weeks, I developed this fantasy in which I got everyone in the world to agree that the best thing for us all to do would be to bulldoze all our modern creations into a really deep hole, deep enough to melt it all down, with the bulldozers themselves being the last things to go. I had it all worked out. But the longer I thought about it, the less perfect this plan revealed itself to be. Even if I could manage to convince everyone, surely it would just be a matter of time before we recreated the modern world all over again. And who wants to go through that journey twice? So trying to figure out how humans are supposed to live is going to be trickier than I initially thought. And I would learn later that there were other serious problems with this plan, mainly that the Earth can't possibly support 8 billion hunter-gatherers. We need agriculture and chemical fertilizer to support our numbers. Also, most of us wouldn't survive a day if thrust into our quote-unquote natural environment. So there's no going backward, and that's fine. I don't really want to give up antibiotics and electric guitars and all the rest anyway. So going forward is obviously our only way forward, but it's instructive still to look at how our ancestors lived, how our brains and bodies evolved to function as a model for how we're supposed to live. This is essentially what zookeepers do for the animals in their care. To the best of their ability, hopefully, they provide surroundings and forms of stimulation, or enrichment as they call it, to simulate the animal's natural environment. So another way you could ask this question is, what might a human zoo look like if it were built by benevolent, intelligent aliens? What forms of enrichment might they provide to keep us happy? The funny thing is that, in a very real way, we are our own zookeepers. The world we inhabit is largely one of our own creation, and not just the physical infrastructure, but the enrichment too, the games we play to keep ourselves occupied. The only problem is the games we play aren't very fun, the consequences for losing are dire, and they're devastating to the planet. So, we'll have to be better zookeepers for ourselves going forward. And I'm not saying this to be motivational, it's just a matter of fact. Either we'll figure out how humans are supposed to live, or we'll learn how humans are supposed to die. Modern science corroborates what doomsday prophets have been saying for centuries, which is this path ain't sustainable. Hence the name of the channel, Apocalypse or Utopia. But really, I don't see this as a binary choice. I used to be solidly on Team Utopia, but it seems increasingly apparent that we humans have to learn things the hard way, so an apocalypse might be a foregone conclusion. Even so, I remain optimistic. As long as we don't go completely extinct, we will rebuild, and we'll hopefully remember to be more careful next time. Now, if you balk at the word utopia, let me explain. It's true that no single vision of an ideal society will ever be ideal to everyone, and it's also true that utopian schemes have failed spectacularly in the past. But I'm not suggesting that we should implement my vision or anyone else's. What I'm suggesting is that society, on a global scale, over geologic spans of time, simply will become more utopian because it's the most stable arrangement. We'll never arrive at utopia, it's a direction, not a destination. If you still don't like the word utopia, you can replace it with a more just world, if you like. To say that the world becomes more just over time shouldn't be that controversial. Probably the most famous expression of this concept was by Martin Luther King. The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. I'm convinced this is more than just an inspiring idea. Are there counterexamples? Sure. But in the aggregate, over eons, culture evolves toward justice, toward egalitarianism, toward utopia. Why is utopia the most stable arrangement? There's very little that we can say that humans are hardwired for, but it's my contention, with support from people smarter than I am, that we are hardwired to care about fairness. We are designed by evolution to live in and maintain egalitarian societies. To be sure, we can tolerate a great deal of unfairness, but we don't like it, which makes it unstable in the long run. You can think of unfairness as an agitator, which will stir up social change wherever it exists. Of course, those who benefit from the unfairness won't see it as unfair and will do everything in their power to maintain the status quo, but no dynasty lasts forever, and once the common folk gain an improvement in their standard of living, it's hard to take it away from them. It's probably the underlying thesis of this channel that the ongoing experiment of civilization, which begins by convention with the advent of agriculture and the stratification of wealth and power, is a journey back to the egalitarian political system of our prehistoric ancestors on a global scale. If you are cynical about humankind's capacity to change in any meaningful and significant way, I would suggest it's probably because, like me, you have a sneaky little belief that the world should be more evolved than it is already. If Utopia were possible, we'd have figured it out by now, or something like that. But really, we've had very little time, compared to the reign of dinosaurs, for example, to figure out how to support ourselves without threatening the health of the biosphere. And there's no way that we could have skipped past this dystopian phase that we're in now. I think I've been motivated to study evolution to understand how we got to where we are now, partly because it helps me to accept the world the way it is, to forgive humankind for our short-sightedness, for not being more evolved already. And acceptance is a good place to start, I think. If you want to help create a better world, it helps if you don't bring a negative attitude with you. All right, now, with the myriad cultures that have existed over the millennia, maybe asking how humans are supposed to live doesn't even make sense. We're the most behaviorally diverse species on the planet, so it seems our defining characteristic is that we have no defining characteristic. It's true that we can survive in almost any environment, including, crucially, environments of our own making, which no cave dweller could have possibly imagined. But that doesn't mean that we thrive equally well in any environment. For better or worse, we can tolerate some pretty shitty situations, but we'd like to minimize the shittiness going forward. No doubt, our enormous cultural diversity makes the question of how we're supposed to live a complex one. But it's also really good news. It means that we're largely unconstrained by our biology, by instincts, which of course everyone knows, but it remains an open question just how unconstrained we really are. Are we doomed to pursue our narrow self-interests until we suck the planet dry or blow it up? Of course, time will tell, but to conclude prematurely that the answer is yes reflects either a lack of imagination, an unjustified cynicism, or an underappreciation for the flexibility of culture and the influence it has on our behavior and cognition. We already know we can adapt to challenges that didn't exist when our bodies and brains were still evolving. If this weren't the case, we never would have made the leap from nomadic bands to the first cities. Okay, fine, but aren't violence and greed hardwired into us too? They appear in every culture today and have been around presumably since the dawn of time, so surely they're just inevitable expressions of human nature, right? Not necessarily. Another explanation is that the circumstances have just never existed in which these antisocial behaviors don't confer some advantage. The essential rules of the survival game are the same on every continent, so it makes sense to expect some basic similarities among the cultures that manage to win at it. Winning strategies to this point have involved either pulling in more resources than your neighbor or having the means to take those resources by force. And this pattern goes back a very, very long time. But these rules are changing, and changing quickly. Bigger bombs and bigger oil refineries won't help us anymore. The challenges we face are unprecedented, so it's reasonable to expect unprecedented solutions. You'll hear me talk a lot about cultural evolution on this channel, and I want to be upfront about the fact that it's a controversial subject. Before we can agree that culture evolves in a utopian direction, we'd have to agree that culture evolves, and not everyone does. The mainstream view in anthropology is that it does not. And there are legitimate reasons for this, I think. For one, to accept that culture evolves opens the door to the suggestion that some cultures are more evolved than others, which sounds reminiscent of the 19th century social Darwinists from whom anthropologists have wanted to distance themselves ever since. And there's no proposed mechanism for cultural evolution that's as parsimonious as Darwin's descent with modification by natural selection. A defense of cultural evolution deserves its own video, but for now I'll just say that despite these challenges, denying that culture evolves seems to me like a case of missing the forest for the trees. At the most basic level, culture is adaptation without a corresponding change in genetics, which is to say, culture evolves so our biology doesn't have to. Okay, thank you for watching the first ever video on this channel. I'm excited to get a sense of who's into this kind of thing, so if you feel so inclined, please let me know what you think. Thanks, bye.